I'm standing for Shane Epaha, whose apology for today, as well was the Mayor. Just before we start, just a bit of intel about the new speaker system that we're using. Previously, we were under the impression when you pressed your button, you were the only one live. When you're waiting, your microphone is actually live as well, up to four microphones. So just be aware that if you're deciding to make comments to your next door neighbour, that more than likely you might be caught by the microphone. So I thought it was worthwhile appraising you of that. So let's move on to the meeting agenda. So let's start with apologies, please, which I've already noted that Shane and the Mayor. Is there any further apologies? I note the Deputy Mayor's not here.
Sam is online.
I'm actually online, Grant.
I'm sorry, I
so
didn't
we'll
realise
be
you're
here
online.
for the meeting.
Welcome.
Good.
Is an apology for lateness? Or? Okay. Councillor Hassan. Councillor Lyle? Anyone heard from Councillor Lyle? We'll put it down as apology for lateness. I'll move to the chair that it be accepted. All those in favour? Carried. Thank you. Identification of any extraordinary business. There being none, we'll carry on. Conflicts of interest, other than being recorded. There being none, we'll carry on. Public forum, none being noted. Moving on to the confirmation of minutes. They'll take them as read. Are there any items you wish to bring to my attention or to the meeting's attention from the last meeting? There be none, we'll carry on. Committee terms of reference. Just to note for the meeting, there are a couple of items in there that I'll bring to the meeting's attention in general business at the end of the meeting, but other than that, we'll move on. Chairperson's verbal report, given it's the first meeting of the year and I'm standing in. Sophie.
Apologies, do we not need to move and confirm the minutes?
I can. Did I not? Sorry, my apologies. I'll take you as moving them, Sophie. Seconder?
Yeah, I'm happy to.
Phil, all those in favour? Carried. Thank you, Sophie, for bringing that to my attention. As I said, as I'm standing for Shane, and I am, it's the start of the year, there is no verbal report of any note, so we'll move straight to the first report, which is the Chief Financial Officer's report. Alison.
Thanks, Grant. Like Grant says, it's the first month of the year, so this is a verbal and very brief report. Just a few things to note, just with the audit. We are, as Sharon noted in her email pre-Christmas, we are looking at a March adoption. We have had some delays that Sharon alluded to. We're working through those within the team and with Audit New Zealand. From the finance team standpoint, we'd just like to introduce Becca, who's sitting at the table with Sarah, and Neil, who's sitting in the corner. Both of those, Becca and Neil, started in December and January. Just before Sarah and Becca talk to the finance reports, just a few things worth noting that we are going to be changing this report over time. I think I've alluded to before, we're good at reporting what has happened, but we need to start looking at that year-end projections and the risks and opportunities, what Becca and the team are working through. Development contributions, Peter and Neil will talk to that later, but just I think reiterating what I've said previously, that this is an ongoing exercise. Today's report will not include everything that people want, but we are working towards that. Final thing is just an apologies from an investment paper. Tim Harris and his team will have that ready for the next meeting. And I think one thing that's sort of missing from this agenda is a work plan. There's never been a work plan for this committee. We will look to put something in for the next meeting. I can only assume it's because of the consistency in the papers in the past, but I think it's quite good to see what papers are going to be tabled and when. So that will be ready for the next meeting. And that was all I had.
I open the floor for questions to either Alison or the team.
Just when you note on audit, how's that going? And are we waiting on things? Because I know that there's been some complications with audit previously. And I know that, you know, this is something that you and I have discussed around the trust. We're still waiting on 2022-23 audit account for them.
Yeah, look, in summary, yes, we've had some challenges with the audit this year. It's not because anything fundamentally is wrong. We have struggled with some of the systems challenges and also finding work papers from the prior year. which is your starting point in any audit. So that's what's taking up the time. Like I say, there's nothing fundamentally wrong. But we are working with Audit New Zealand to make sure these things are addressed and finalised as soon as possible.
Cool. Thank you.
Further questions? In the interest of my few questions. Page 22, we've got our revenue pages there. It looks like we are $7 million under budget for DCs. Is that something that you're concerned about? Are we likely to catch that up? How will it affect our spending profile if we are under budget and DCs received?
Well, I think, Sarah and Becca will talk to this in more detail in the reports themselves.
Yep.
But I think with my verbal update, it's that year-end projection piece that we're looking to report on. So where we've got variances, whether they be positive variances or negative variances, what is our year-end position likely to be? So to answer that immediate question, will we catch up between now and year-end? We don't know the answer to that yet, but that's one we're working towards.
On page 23, you talk about investment revenue being up by 286,000. I think it would be helpful to the committee if we were able to see a table of where that investment income is coming from. I think that's interest received from cash held, I'm assuming. It sounds like it is. But we've got a range of other investments as well. We don't have any oversight of the performance on a monthly basis or bi-monthly basis.
So there is a lot more detail that goes into the Treasury reporting that goes to audit and risk. So Neil and I had a chat this morning, so we can talk to some of this detail when we move into the finance report, but happy to add a table and take some of the extracts that go to the Treasury report that help explain where these numbers are at.
Is that the challenge we're facing around the sort of the line of delineation between finance and what goes with?
I don't think it's a challenge. It sort of goes back to the work plan around what information we are sharing. There should be a linkage between audit and risk. The terms of reference for both committees are different in terms of what they stand for, but it's making sure within this committee meeting that the financial information that is presented tells that story. So it's capturing some of the information that goes into those other reports into the broader finance and performance paper.
Page 23, we're talking about unfavourable budgets, particularly around consulting of over 500,000. That's not rechargeable. Is there a particular part of our business which is causing that cost overruns in consultants?
I'm going to leave that until we get into the main report, Grant, because
Okay.
that's what Sarah and Becca are going to talk to.
Okay, thank you. There's going to be more detail in the final reports, rather than me asking questions on an ad hoc basis. I'll let the team go forward to the next report. So the verbal update, finance and performance, there's no recommendation, it's just for information. So we're moving on to the dashboard now.
Can I?
Sorry, Nicole.
Sorry, I didn't realise.
Sorry.
I had a question. So I had a similar question around that consulting thing as what Grant has brought up, but on that same page, so we're talking page 20, page 23, at the top bullet point, it's got that additional grants received for MB Tourism and MFE Yards Lagoon to be spent on public toilets and ecological registration projects respectively. So just on the MB Tourism, so is there still money available to be able to apply for public toilets? Because I thought that fund was stopping. Does anyone?
I can't answer that question off the top of my head,
but I
but
think
it's one we can go and
staff
we can
member
come back to you on.
who's present may be able to.
I think that's one we'll come back to you on, Nicole.
Okay.
Mine might be the same thing. Are we going to be going through the dashboard with the team shortly? Okay, I've got a question in a minute.
So look, I think I'll hand over to Sarah and to Becca to talk through the report, which will possibly answer some of the other questions that have been asked so far.
Thank you. Good morning. So the finance report for November 2024, the council's year-to-date net operating surplus, excluding vested asset revenue and depreciation, is 14.5 million, unfavourable to budget by 1.9 million. Year-to-date, revenue excluding vested assets for the period was 85.4 million, unfavourable to budget by 3.7 million. Total year-to-date operating revenue excluding development contributions was 76.8 million, favourable to budget by 3.7 million. The main year-to-date variances, if we exclude development contributions, are increased receipts for fees and charges, 3 million, favourable to budget due to increased resource consents, general receipts, registration fees and building consents. The increases in the resource consent and building consent revenue are offset by the additional consulting spend, which you mentioned earlier. Subsidies and grants, 609,000, favourable to budget due to the NZTA subsidy claims being 57% ahead of budget year to date. And additional grants received from, as you say, MB Tourism and MFE Yars Lagoon to be spent on public toilets and ecological restoration projects. Investment revenue, 286,000, favourable to budget due to higher than expected interest revenue. For the period, the Council's year-to-date operating expenses, excluding depreciation and amortisation, were 71 million, favourable to budget by 1.7 million. The main year-to-date variances to budget are personnel costs. Collectively, they are 576k, favourable due to vacancies and seasonal variances. Now, there's a review of all budgeted variances and vacancies currently underway, so we'll be able to bring that to you in later reports. Elected members' remuneration, 32k, unfavourable to budget due to the release of the determination falling outside of the long-term plan budgeting period. Maintenance expenditure, 594,000, unfavourable, mainly due to increased seasonal expenditure on roading repairs and maintenance, partially offset by the increased NZTA claim. Roading maintenance is expected to be on budget for the full year. Consulting, legal and professional services, 1.8 million, unfavourable, and as noted by Grant, 1.3 million of which is directly rechargeable to the building and resource consents. The other 0.5 million is across many of the departments. So when we pull it through, it's across including asset service delivery, legal, digital and marketing, and that 0.5 million is likely to remain overspent for the full year. Overheads, 496,000, favourable, mainly due to savings against budget for insurance. This is a timing difference as additional insurance invoices are expected before year end. Other expenditure, 1.7 million, favourable across activities such as carriageway lighting, water monitoring quality, general expenses, conference and training. Finance costs, favourable to budget due to less external borrowing being drawn down. Operating projects, 1.1 million, favourable to budget. Now this variance is currently being reviewed as part of the hygiene project. Capital summary, so this summary is included for information for completeness of the report and we were covered in detail in the following report presented by Peter. The balance sheet, we'll hand back to you, Alison.
Thanks, Sarah. I think just adding to some of the comments that Sarah's made and to the question that Grant asked earlier, just within the consulting spend, I think it's also just worth noting, so of that 1.8, 1.3 of which comes through in that line item, but predominantly is recharged through the revenue line, so it's offset there. And I think the other 0.5 that Sarah alluded to, some of that is costs that we're incurring to backfill that positive variance we have in the personnel line item as well. So we brought in consultants where we don't have the resource. So we're sitting with the positive variance of 576 in personnel. There is an offset aspect there as well. I just wanted to note that. Moving into the balance sheet, there's not a huge amount to add there. I mean, our cash position receivables have gone up since last year. That's pretty much linked back to the rates instalment. We've got a term deposit that's came off in the financial assets, but other than that, the balance sheet is sort of as we would expect it to be at this point in the year. Debt position has increased. That is increased in keeping with the the capital works programme. PPE, which is a property, plant and equipment, that's with us recognising assets in our balance sheet. I didn't have any other points to raise on that.
Just as a note, Alison, in the terms of reference, it talks about when budgets are running over, that they must be met from the efficiencies and savings within the activity group. Otherwise, a paper needs to be brought to this group asking for a budget increase for the year end. Are we likely to see papers coming for budget increases to this table?
So that sort of goes back to my sort of verbal update earlier, where we're looking at where our projected year-end position is. So there may be positives and positive and negative variances, get a sentence out, across the broader P&L. So where that occurs, then I wouldn't expect to be bringing any papers back. Where we've got line items where we're expecting a full year overspend, then we would note that and bring that back to this committee.
Just noting the 500,000 was expected to carry right through, wasn't it, for the consultant spend you were describing? So we'd expect somewhere a paper to come for that.
To the extent where it isn't offset by personnel cost.
Sophie?
Yeah, sorry, just a small question really. There's a line on page 23 regarding elected members' remuneration, and in the scale of things it's a small amount compared to some of the others, but is that because it's to do with when the determination from the Remuneration Authority landed and the LTP? Does that mean for 2 or 3 years we're going to be looking like we're being paid above budget?
Yes, that's correct.
Okay, thanks.
Phil?
I just wanted to quickly ask a question about the consultancy side of it. It looks to me like we, to correct me if I'm wrong, we've spent 1.3 million over budget on consultants for the consents and everything, and we've charged out 3 million for the same thing. Do we not just pass the charge on? Because is there a difference of 1.3 to 3? Obviously the surplus of $3 million doesn't make sense when we've only spent 1.3 unless we're clipping the ticket on the way through. I'm not sure whether I've made. Are you asking the question I'm asking?
So you're asking fees and charges are 3 million favourable.
Yep.
And consultants are 1.3 unfavourable
Yep.
due to consultants' fees directly being offset.
So
if you take the 3 million,
Yep.
1.3 of that is consultants' fees. So we pay the consultants and directly charge them out.
Yep.
Yeah. So they offset each other.
So is the other 1.7, is that related to internal staff that have generated the money through additional?
Yes.
Okay, thank you.
Megan?
Yes, I have a few questions. You talked about, so first of all, I've got 2 questions on expenses and then 2 on income. So that's page 22. So you said that it's the 1.7 of other expenditure, 1.7 favourable to budget, because there's been reduced spending on some of the services, which you included water testing. So why is that happening? Are we just not doing the services that we would otherwise do?
I'm sorry, I can't answer that question. It would need to be an ELT member, and I can't see Murray here.
I think I'll just add to that. So we've got timing. We've got some timing and phasing issues of when the budgets were set. So not wishing to deflect your question, but it's sort of going back to that. What is a projected year-end position? What is a permanent saving that we can recognise? And what is a timing difference based on when a budget was set and how we're spending the money? So at this point, it's not like we're not doing something that we set out to do in the long-term plan or in the budget. It's likely to be a timing, but we just need to clarify that.
Right, okay, so it might be performed before the 30th of June. Got it.
Yes, and that goes to what does our year-end position look like? And when we get to report that, we'd have a column item at the end to say our projected year-end position is likely to be X, Y, and Z. Where we see a permanent difference or variance, whether it be positive or negative, then we'll narrate what that makes up.
Right, okay, because I do see in the performance report that we talk a bit about capital works, but it doesn't really talk about like the ongoing services and whether or not we're changing those services or providing the same, providing more or less.
Exactly, and I think that goes to the changes we need to make in this report. So it's got a reasonable, this is what's happened in the past, but we need to start looking at Where are those variances? What's driving those? Is it timing? And what is our projected year-end position?
Okay, great, thank you. And my other, it's the same as Sophie, it's really de minimis, so it's not, in the scheme of things, really important, but I really don't understand that 32,000 and about the member costs and what has happened there. So can somebody just explain in really simple, basic terms what's happened?
I think I might be able to help.
Okay.
My understanding is there's been a determination by the commissioner around elected members' remuneration. The budgets were probably constructed on the basis that would have a standardised remuneration through the period. So as the determinations come out, you are running over budget compared to budgets that have been approved originally.
But the amount that people are receiving hasn't changed, despite that determination.
It is. You should have changed. Yeah.
Oh, for others, okay, right.
I suppose that's the question. Maybe your particular position is not captured by that
Right.
determination.
Right,
And maybe
got it.
that's an oversight by us whether we should run in parallel your remuneration with the determination remuneration.
Okay, I
So
wasn't
maybe
aware it
particularly
changed.
just to you. So we just need to follow that up.
Okay, no, well, that's fine. I really wasn't aware it had changed. So then the other questions were on income. So with the targeted rates, that's 240,000 less than budgeted, but it's not commented on. Is there a reason why that's less than expected?
I think with the rates, these are timing differences just now. I'm not overly concerned about those variances, but what we will do in future reports is just talk to whether it is a timing difference. The values are relatively low at this point, so it doesn't concern me at this point in time.
Right, okay.
I'm assuming, Megan, that some of those might be including variable rates like water charges. So depending on how much water is actually used, it could be variable.
Right. Yeah, it would be helpful maybe to get that level of understanding what's included and what's not, and when. Thank you.
Lydia.
I guess the consulting and legal costs, it always sits there. It's really plain. It's in your face to see that, you know, it's over. And I guess looking forward, and this is the forecasting that you're talking about, I would expect to see a decrease in that, especially with having a in-house legal team now as well. So our consultancy shouldn't be as high with legal costs as.
So I think you're right, we've got a head of legal and risk and a legal team there now, but there is always going to be that need for that external legal spend, and some of it will be specialist in nature. And whilst we'll have the in-house resource, they are not subject matter experts in everything, in the same way we would use consultants as well. So certainly Julie and her team are working through how we dial back the external spend, what can be done in-house. It's not going to happen overnight though.
Yeah, and I guess my question is on the balance sheet, and I just would like some more information around accounting for the DCs. And so is it normal practice for them not to be counted as a liability until they're spent?
Can we hold that question until we go through the development contribution report?
Sounds like a good idea. Thanks. We'll carry that question forward, Lydia. Any further questions? Same probably on there's the capital summary. Is that more the questions for that more related to Kamal?
Yes, I think within the capital, all we've got is a brief summary in there. The report that Peter and Kamal will talk to will go through a lot more detail.
Okay. And likewise, I raised the question around debt position. I guess it was that question around whether we should talk about it at finance and performance or whether it should be audit and risk. Your view is probably Treasury should be at audit and risk, was that?
Look, the Treasury paper is always going to go to audit and risk. I think the point I made, Grant, was we will include more detail on the debt position within this report. It's not going to be a mirror image because there's information that probably doesn't need to come here, but we'll flesh out the report so it explains that story and what our position is.
Just to sort of give you a heads up, particularly around the debt position, when we talk about DCs, we'd like to understand what the real headroom is, because if the DCs have been spent, we obviously need to draw them down again to get to a net zero, so that'll affect their headroom, potential headroom. So I just fair warning that we'll ask that question. Yep. Okay, so there's no further questions on that paper. and there's no motion or required. So that was for information. So we'll now move on to the organisational performance projects paper. Kamal. Your own, or oh no, we've got Peter. Welcome. The floor's yours.
Thank you, Kia ora. Peter and I are here today to present on the report on organizational projects and performance report for the current financial year, but mainly on the cost to end of November 2024. The wider team that we've got may have some points to add as we move through the report. We will take this report as read. We also want to note that we have incorporated the requests and the feedbacks from the previous reporting that we did in November, added further context, streamlined the report, and we would welcome any further feedback for the future reports. The report is written in time, so there may be some movements on progress and some points that have changed since the report, and we'll try and highlight these as the report, as we progress through the report. The report has been broken down into a number of sections in terms of delivery to date, carry forwards anticipated, the phasing and the spend, the forecast spend for the remaining 2 quarters, and the project tracking on key projects. I'll pass it on to Peter for the next phase.
So from progress and expenditure point, year to date, as of November, we've spent 57.2 million with a budget of 54.3, so that puts us 3 million ahead of budget.
Peter, just turning
Sorry,
the
Peter, could you put your
microphone on, please.
Sorry, I'll start again. So we're currently sitting at 57.2 year-to-date actuals for November, and our budgeted was 54.3 million, so that puts us at 2.8 million ahead of budget, with 31% of that total annual budget spent, with expectation to ramp up and spend higher amounts in summer and the drier months when more work, especially roading, gets done. As part of our forecasting, we've identified, to try and attempt to identify where our carry forward risks are, we've identified 17 million total of carry forward risk. Of that 17 million, 4.9 million won't be carried forward as they are gains through value engineering, meaning we've found ways to complete projects cheaper, or costs have been incurred in a prior year and were no longer needed, the budget was no longer needed in this year, which brings our expected carry forward at this point in time down to 12 million, which makes up 7% of our total annual budget. The largest of that is 3.7 million from the NZTA subsidy reduction, where we were unable to complete this work without the subsidy from NZTA. So that budget will be carried forward into next year with the hopes that we can get more subsidised to pay for that. Would you like to speak on the phasing spend?
So when we move through in terms of the phasing and spend on year to date, no surprise, figure 1 and 3, as per the previous report, shows that we are still currently on track. As Peter has highlighted, areas that we've been spending most of our majority is on the water and transport infrastructure as Selwyn grows. When we consider the forecast for the coming quarters, we can see the same on water and transport, where work has been planned and is accelerated and is expected to accelerate during the Q3 and Q4 due to the good planning that has been put in place. Spend is mainly with our larger projects that have been approved, which are in the wastewater, the water projects, the safety upgrades, the public car parks, and resurfacing during the summer months. If we look at the report tracking on certain projects, which is on page 30. Just wanted to highlight, as per the previous projects and reporting, Ellesmere to Pines, we are working ahead of schedule, so that is on track, and we are expected to have some value engineering that is still being realized, but at the moment we're expecting 1 million below the expected budget. Prebbleton roundabouts, the projects are complete in terms of the 4 roundabouts, but we're expecting some extra costs in terms of the financial. This thing is still being worked through because it ties in not only with the property aspects, but still some construction work that we needed to finish through. Waiora Wharero, we're expecting a bit of carry forwards. It's not a major aspect at the moment because we still have 2 years to complete parts of the project or the whole completion, but just because I've flagged it as a carry forward and it is a key community project, we've just written it as a minor. So we still have an anticipation that we will catch up. Prebbleton Reservoir and pipe work, we've just got a month's delay, but still working on track in terms of budget. I'll pass it on to Peter. Thank you.
Could we just turn the microphone on?
Sorry about that. From the graphs that you were shown last time, we've updated them and they now include colorblind friendly colors to help for more people to see them. We've updated based on feedback what kind of results you want to see by delivery area. We are still working on the sanitization of the data leading into these graphs, so we're hoping that by the next council, by the next FMP meeting, we'll be able to produce those and which will then kind of take over from the graphs that we are creating in the report now.
But we expect the graphs to be similar in nature to what we have provided in this report. Any questions, please?
Questions around the table? As there's no other questions, I might ask one. You talked about expenditure being sort of 3 million ahead of budget. Is that, as you said, because of the staging, you expect to be within the ultimate budget for the year? It's not an overspend, it's actually just you've increased the rate of CapEx.
Yes, we have been ahead in terms of capital delivery. So primarily Ellesmere to Pines project was one where we accelerated in terms of the work that was happening, and that was brought dividends, and hence it brought in earlier aspects in terms of budgets and forecast.
On page 28, there's a small item for Kakaha Park stormwater remediation. The last time it was brought to the council table, there was a debate as to whether the council was liable for this, as it was we thought it was, well, the governance group thought it was actually a design engineer problem that had been outsourced. Has it been decided that the council is liable to pay for the remediation rather than the design engineer?
It is a very tricky aspects on that, just because of the number of consultants and the way that it had been phased through and broken through. The best alternative is now we've got that extra land, so we're looking at how we can incorporate all the other features and still resolve all our current issues. So as we're working through that part, still in the design phase in terms of stormwater and the rest of the additional parts that we want to work through, we're sure that we'll be able to collaborate and work together and resolve any issues. But we're being very mindful in terms of the strategy and the issues that we have currently there, that we can resolve them.
So I'm not quite clear from that, Kamal. So what the question was, is council ultimately picking up the tab for the errors that were created in the stormwater initial design?
Yes.
Frustrating. Any further questions? Sorry, Phil. Thank you.
Yeah, just on page 30, I just wanted to look at that Prebbleton roundabouts comment. You made a comment there about it being 2 million overspent, and I didn't, which is a 6.5% increase in the total project cost. Just wanted to, I didn't quite follow what you were saying, the rationality as that overspend.
So it's approximately 4.5%, based on 31.53 as the plan, and the EAC is 33. So that's approximately 4.5%. The main reasons have been due to contamination that we've had, service issues that were unforeseen, and also property issues that we're still working through. So till we don't resolve the full property aspects, we're not fully sure where we'll sit at. It could come under or over, but at the moment, we are okay.
The obvious question is, where's that money coming from if it's not budgeted for?
So that is something that we'll be working through in terms of any other value savings that we have had, or also discussing with NZTA that we're co-funding certain aspects of the project.
Is it something that will come back here once that for those where that money's, which budget that's coming from?
Correct, it would be.
Phil, I think that ties into the terms of reference issue I raised earlier on, that
Oh, absolutely. Yep.
that if it can't be met within activity savings, which has been quite substantial savings within the Leaston Pines works, but that paper will come back here asking for a budget increase if required for that ultimately. No further questions? Okay, there's a recommendation that we receive that report. I'll move from that, Chair, that be accepted. All those in favour? Carried. We'll now move forward to, we're all looking forward to the DC summary report, page 35. I know now Deborah's not here for that, which is a shame. She's passionate about that.
Peter, just before you crack into the report, just being mindful of the outstanding question that Lydia had around how that gets captured in the balance sheet.
So I'll have to check in terms of where the connection is. From my understanding, we do hold our DC revenue received in liabilities until it is paid out to work on whichever area the DCs were recovered from. So this report is a new report, and we're open to any changes or ideas about what people wish to see going forward. In this report, we have identified any DCs collected and balances where we've received more DCs than we've paid out in black numbers, and we've used red bracketed numbers to represent where we've spent more on projects than we have actually collected on DCs to this point. DC collection is a bit of an art, because when we calculate DCs, we calculate what works have been done and what works are intended to be done, and then we map that across the expected growth, and that's how we figure out the rate. But as to when we get to collect those rates, reserves tend to be picked up first, because that is when land is bought and subdivided, whilst stormwater and water rates are only collected once buildings are done and connected into the system. So you tend to see that we end up with a higher reserve fund, whilst the water fund ends up in the negative and then catches up later on once everyone builds there and connects on. So that's kind of why you'll end up seeing balances either highly in the positive or in the negative, and it's due to timing as to when those DCs get collected, which from our point of view, we can't push a DC to be collected. It's when the actual action of connecting to a property or subdividing a land occurs that we collect the DCs. On page 36, we've tried to provide a breakdown to show each DC is collected in a different catchment area. So our sewage DCs are collected at a Selwyn-wide area, and this is because the sewage system is so interconnected throughout that any change to one part affects the rest of it. So it's hard for us to really say we are using the DCs from this portion to affect this area, which is why those are collected at a Selwyn area level. Roading is split between Eastern and non-Eastern. Reserve and community DCs are split further by Eastern, Northwest and Southwest. And then our water and stormwater, we're able to go into deeper levels of Springs, Ralston, Malvern, Ellesmere. I've tried to put a general idea of which townships sit in each area to help understand where in each DC area your DCs get collected. From our DC cumulative balances for year to date, as of November, our highest costs of 9.6 million is sitting in sewerage, and this is to do with the Ellesmere to Pine system. And so again, that will end up being collected later on to bring our balance back in line. From a reserves perspective, again, we see the opposite, especially in Eastern. We can see year to date that we've collected 1.5 million, and this is because we've had quite a few new subdivisions going in, and as the land is subdivided, we've collected more of that reserve revenue, which will then be spent later on down the line. Again, in the water catchment area, our largest spends to date sit in the under sewerage, which is the Ellesmere to Pine, and 3.1 million in water under springs, and this is in relation to the Prebbleton Reservoir and general upgrade of their systems. In the cumulative balances summary, we show what our balance was from 21-22, 22-23, 23 to 24, and then how we have reached up to this point. So you're able to see kind of the ebbs and flows of the system. So you can see that in reserves, that's where our highest is sitting of 34 million. However, in our LTP, you can also see that we have plans to spend 20 million in the Eastern Reserve projects over the next 3 years, with 50 million planned over the next 10. So even though we're sitting with a high balance now, it will be spent over the years coming based on the LTP. And sewerage is obviously sitting at a large negative, again, because of primarily our Ellesmere to Pine and other sewerage upgrades, which is why Selwyn, over the past few years, we've been going through a lot of work to get our sewerage system up to spec and be a really high-end one, which is why we're currently sitting at a negative balance. Are there any questions in relation to that?
Egan, you're hovering. Yeah, I'm encouraging you to push that button, I can see.
First of all, the table 1, the catchment area breakdown, that's really helpful to explain how the DCs are divided. When I look at the cumulative table, the part that I'm not quite sure about, and I understand the ebbs and flows and that that sewage is going to be charged when the infrastructure is built rather than at the outset. So if we offset that against the policy and we go, right, we know that, my understanding of the policy is that DCs must be spent within 10 years or returned to the developer. So if that is the policy, how do we capture that? And when does the day one start ticking? Is it when the infrastructure is built, or when they pay, or when they get their resource consents?
That's a good question. We would have to go back and look more into detail to be able to break that out for you and give you a more fuller answer on that whole flow. But if that's something you want, we can look into that for possibly the next meeting.
I think my main question would be getting an understanding of how much has to be returned and when, and if we are actually sticking to that policy, or if we're at risk that we're not returning it when we should be. If we should be.
If I may add to that, completely support what Peter said. We'll look into it in further detail. Also just want to add some context that we do measure these DT contributions per project. So we can track how they're being recovered and spent on the projects. And we also provide the balance sheet view to show the cumulative balance of the DCs recovered. And then we can also measure how long projects take to complete, which will give us a clearer picture of are we spending it in time with legislation. But we'll certainly get back to you on that.
Lydia.
So thank you for clearing up that DCs are a liability until paid. So on the balance sheet, is that under payables and deferred revenue?
Again, I would just have to go back and double check from the balance sheet counterpart how that all feeds through, because separate reporting. So, but I can get back to you on that one.
Thank you.
Just to provide you with a bit of help on that, it's in our annual report as a policy that it should be shown as a liability, and to my knowledge it's not. And I'm surprised the auditors haven't picked that up. So you may just want to do a bit of homework there. Just as an example, I think Waimakaviri is a council that shows it correctly in their balance sheet, to my knowledge. So you may want to just reference that. Further questions, Sophie?
Yeah, kia ora. Thank you very much. It's really good to see the numbers, even if they, look black, red all over the place. But it's good to have that daylight on it. My query, you may not be able to answer this. It's more about going forward when we've got things like fast track consents and stuff coming through, because the DCs have been set as part of the LTP, and some of these new projects, depending on the speed at which they potentially happen, and obviously they've still got a panel to go through and all this sort of stuff, but for instance the one that was declined by council out at Prebleton because we didn't have the wastewater capacity, I think, if I remember rightly. Putting that in is we're going to require a project that is not currently captured in our DC project policy. Do we have any idea yet, from your perspective, how that's going to work, or is this like an ongoing, who knows? Because, yeah.
We'd have to look at how the variance to the LTP would work, because obviously if new projects come in, then other projects end up being pushed out just from a resourcing perspective. So you would end up seeing DCs collected paying for that project first and then paying for projects that get moved out. Obviously, LTP is a point in time, it's an assumption, and that's why we do update the DCs every 3 years based on changes that have occurred and things. So yeah, it's a bit of an ebb and flow in that regard.
Yeah.
Alison's just going to make a comment.
Yeah, I think I'm just adding to what Peter said, Sophie, as well, is just going back to pre-Christmas when myself and Mark Rikers talked to the additional work that needs to take place. So that goes to the policy review, making sure we're doing what we need to, but also goes to the collection and then the distribution, and ultimately then how we report this through. So this is an ongoing project. We're not going to be able to answer everything overnight, and we need to make sure our policy is fit for purpose.
Thank you.
Megan, have you finished your question? Sophie, you had a question? No? Perhaps as an element of clarity for the room, just to explain how DCs are handled from a financial point of view. We don't hold them as cash, they're just netted in through the process. So we talked about, I think the net number's 21 million. Are you looking at that around our headroom? Because eventually we're going to, if it's netted into our current cash flow, obviously we're going to have to draw that down as debt, aren't we, if we're going to spend it?
So I think, sorry Peter, I'll take this one. I think we spoke to this at the long-term plan, so there's always an aspect of, depending on the timing when a development contribution comes in, we may need to borrow in advance. So that borrowing that we capture is factored into our headroom. We would look at the term of that borrowing and allow it for when we assume that DC to come in, so that we were not over leveraging ourselves.
One of the questions that sort of stands out when you look at the spreadsheet on page 39, community, 0 contributions for 3 years in a row. I'm assuming that's community centres. We're actively looking to build one in Leaston, planning one in Prebleton, and there doesn't seem to be any collection of DCs in that space. Is there an answer to that?
I believe, I'd have to follow up on it, but I do believe that in previous years, community and reserves were combined. And as of this year, we've started splitting it out, which is why you don't have information split out in previous years. But going forward, you will start to see community filled out separately.
So if we split it out, surely shouldn't there be a balance brought over that shows a credit to that account? Or is that, as those numbers in November, they're all in deficit? There's no credits in that, they've all been spent.
Yeah, so that is an ongoing split. As the DCs were put into these new catchments, we're still working on splitting out which amounts from previous years need to go where, so that this is an ongoing project.
So there could be some reallocation to community centres. into
Exactly.
that space. So it's a work in progress. Okay, understood. Further questions from the table? Being none, there's a recommendation we receive that for information. Is there a mover for that? Phil, seconded Lydia. All those in favour? Carried. Thank you. We now move to a resolution to exclude the public. Is there a mover? Nicole, seconded by Bob. All those in favour? Carried. We'll now pause momentarily while we